Now, many people are talking about this new worldview that's coming up these years.
Perhaps they're tired of the old one. They don't feel it's working. And also there's some evidence for it, I think, especially in physics and probably in other sciences as well. The evidence in physics comes partly from relativity and partly from quantum theory, or perhaps more from quantum theory than relativity.
And what kind of evidence is that?
Well, in relativity, we have a notion of a universal field, which is dynamic, flowing, and according to Einstein, particles should eventually emerge out of this as singularities or very strong regions of stable pulses of field, which gradually merge, the fields gradually merge with other particles. So we have an unbroken universe which is in constant flow dynamically. And even the very notions of space and time have become relative, so which were previously absolute, where the present laws would break down altogether all concepts that we know. And then there's quantum theory, which perhaps is more revolutionary. And it's hard to explain that in a short time, but there are three main features, I'd say. One is the notion that a quantum process is in some sense indivisible, that it is one whole which it can be broken, but then it becomes an entirely different process, so each process is a whole. Otherwise it can't be what it is. And all the quantum processes of movement are linked, as it were, into one whole. Now, the second point is the wave-particle duality, the discovery that, say, electrons, which are normally and classically particles, can behave statistically like waves in a more precise experiment. And light, which is classically a wave, can behave like a particle in a more precise experiment. So it seems we have these two aspects which depend on how the system is treated, context dependent, which is quite different from the classical idea that whether it's a wave or a particle is intrinsic. Right? Now, the third point was what's called non-locality, that we find that in certain conditions, there's apparently an immediate connection of distant particles, but still it seems to be there. It's connected with the experiment of Einstein, Podolsky, Rosen, and has been checked by, have been tested by Bell's theorem and Aspect's experiment. Again, all of these you see combine to the notion that the universe is a kind of indivisible whole, rather than analyzed into constituent elements which interact as separately existent.
So this unity also creates a kind of ordering of things.
Yes, it can create a kind of ordering of things, but at the same time it explains, you see, you can see that there are situations where we have this high degree of order and others where we don't, that it's possible within the mathematics to see that when something called a wave function can be represented as a set of product of independent factors, and all the particles behave independently, but in a more general situation they don't. So you can explain why we have so much independence in ordinary experience, and yet why in a more careful probing we find order, new kinds of order. So the classical level, Newtonian level, is explained by quantum mechanics as a limiting case, you see, of a more, so that you have a whole, but the whole determines itself to behave somewhat like independent parts in many cases. So even whether it's going to be behaving like parts is determined by the whole, right? You see, I think our perception is influenced by our way of thinking, so that we accept this mechanical way of looking at it. The way we see it depends on the way we think, you see.
So you're saying it's really us that make up the parts?
Well, we actually make up everything in the sense all these theories are made up by us, but in these theories we place the parts.
You just said that in reality we make it all up, not just the parts, but also the wholes. Could you explain?
Well, I think that's the question. What is the relationship of theory to reality, you see? Now, one view is that it reflects reality, you see. Now, that I think that it corresponds to reality. I think that view is only limited, right? But if people are and also people would like not to have their worldviews questioned because they have got used to them and feel comfortable with them. So, therefore, it's very hard to question a worldview.
But in effect, that's what you are doing.
Yeah. Every worldview, I think, is limited. But I think the Western worldview, its limits have not been seen. Now, if you break it up falsely into fragments, then you have confused. You see, you're going to treat these as separate when they're not, and also you're going to unite what's in the fragment when it's not united, right? So it leads to confusion.
So in the West, you tend to confuse the part for the whole and vice versa?
Yeah, you get confused about the part and the whole because you take a fragment as an independent whole. I think the observer is an intrinsic part of the whole. That's what quantum mechanics is teaching us too in physics, right? That the observing instrument is just as much part of the whole, and therefore, because of the possibility of these non-local interactions in quantum mechanics, when an observation is made, the two systems are not really distinct, you see. Therefore, they participate in each other, and you cannot therefore get an unambiguous meaning to the measurement, right? The same happens between human beings, you see. That there is a kind of communication that does not begin by denying wholeness, you see. You see, if we say, here am I and here are you, and then we have already divided it, right? But perhaps we could communicate in the spirit of the whole without assuming that division, right? See, we're not trying to tell, that means I'm not trying to tell you what I think, you not trying to tell me, but rather together we are trying to discover how we're going to think together. Do you see the difference?
Indeed. Is that possible in ordinary language?
Yes, I think it is. It depends on the attitude rather than the language. Our language has been developed so as to emphasize the part, but we can still use it differently, I say. For example, poetry uses language differently, and it is always possible to use language in new ways.
So the basic obstacle is more the attitude of the people involved than the theoretical or verbal. But the psychological attitude towards a new worldview could either be one of that you feel happy that you're liberated, or that you feel that your old worldview crumbles.
Yes, you may want to cling on to your old worldview, or you may feel happy that you're free of it, you see. And I think that people are becoming less satisfied with the old worldview today, generally speaking, that they're not satisfied with this fragmentary view because it has led to so many problems, so much incoherence in the human relationships in society, and with the ecology and so on. You see, that, for example, this fragmentary view has led to treating the whole Earth as a bit fragments to be exploited. Now, that all adds up in the whole to this destruction going on, you see. So as long as we think that way, it will probably go on, you see. People may take a fragmentary approach to repairing the ecology, but it won't work, right? Because that is a situation where the analysis into parts is not relevant, you see. They're not sufficiently independent to allow for such analysis.
So why could physicists see this breakdown of the description in parts 50 years before general society?
Well, they were working on a rather restricted area where the evidence was such as to bring it out. You see, because the area was limited, it was possible to focus more on the problem, right? Whereas the whole social problem is far more complex, and it's so complex that people could always say, maybe it's not that way. But isn't it still surprising that you are able to go from physics into more general problems? Not to me, you see, because I think that's a sign of the wholeness. You see that. There was a medieval view, which I think, there was much more wholeness then. There was a medieval view that everything was an analogy to everything. You see, a human being was a microcosm of the cosmos, so that he had implicit in him the possibility of understanding it. Right?
There are certain technical points where people like Niels Bohr would disagree, because he would feel that you enter discussions that human beings really cannot enter.
I'm not sure why. You see, his whole Niels Bohr's discussion is extremely subtle, and it's very hard to exactly pin him down. I think he would say that there's no point to this sort of speculation. He would regard it as a kind of speculation, or which was not tied to an experimental fact, perhaps. I don't know, you see. But I feel that it's important to be able to make it intelligible, and also to show the connection between this and the whole range of experience and other fields. See, I think the main point, it's hard to say, the main point about would be rather whether we want to take the wave function as the whole description or not. See, I add this particle, right, and say the wave function has the meaning of information that acts on the particle. Now,
maybe you should explain the wave function.
Yes, this wave function is a mathematical representation of the field of information, you see. In the case of one particle, it's like a wave, but it's a wave that acts according to its form and not according to its intensity. With many particles, it's more complex, you see.
And in the Bohr interpretation of atomic physics, he would say that the wave function is just something that we make up to describe.
We make it, well, it's something that Bohr called it an algorithm for calculating experimental results, right, in the phenomena. The wave function is part of an algorithm. You know what an algorithm is, you know?
A way of calculating.
A way of calculating, yeah. Von Neumann said something a little bit different, that the wave function is a complete description of the quantum reality. Now, it's not clear whether Bohr would have ever talked of a quantum reality, because he only talked of this whole phenomenon, right? This would be, if we make an analogy to society, one view would be to say society consists of a lot of people that you could see interrelated, but another view is to say they're interrelated by information exchange, right? Saying that's crucial. Without that, the society would collapse, right? Would not. So I say that's part of the reality of the society, right?
And could you elaborate on your view if you take it to societal analogies? How is your worldview if you give it as a description of human affairs and society?
Yes, well, see, if we think of society, you see, if you compare, you can have every individual trying to follow his own pool of information and leading to chaos. Or you can have people trying to move together with a common pool. See, I think it's essential to have coherence and order and harmony, that the whole society moves together with a common pool of information, like this ballet dance, which is not imposed, right?
Do you think we're moving in that direction?
Well, I think potentially we are. We need to, and some people may be, but, you know, the general trend hasn't got very far, you see, because everything is divided into nations and religions and other kinds of groups which behave as if they were independent, you see, and when they're not. So people will have to give all that up, and they may find it hard, you see. To deal with the ecological problem, I think people will have to give a great deal of that up.
So you're moving your emphasis from the persons, the individuals, the divided parts, to the information flow or the information field of society.
Yes, that's right. But I say each individual contains the whole information field of society in his own way. So
how?
Well, it's in his mind, in his brain. You see, everything you know comes from society practically, right? It may be both information and misinformation, right? But it determines what you do, right?
But you have to read books to get the information.
Yes, but that comes from society, right? Books are part of society. They wouldn't exist. So I say that the individual is formed out of society, but together the individuals form society, right? Now, the individual needs to have freedom to look at all the information and determine, in his own way whether whether it's right or not. But finally, he has to be part of society. Now, we have so many different individuals, each with his own view, and different groups, each with their own view, coming into clash, right?
And when you say that each individual in himself or herself has the whole human experience or knowledge,
yes,
how does it get in there?
Well, in many ways. It gets in there, first of all, by osmosis. They pick it up implicitly from the family, from friends, from school, what you read, what you watch on television. Television is making this much more so, right? And there may, for all we know, be hidden connections, which we don't know, but but implicitly each person contains the whole, right? It's like a hologram which contains the whole, though not in all the detail.
And the hologram is the way of making pictures in 3 dimensions?
In 3 dimensions, where you don't make a point-to-point correspondence between object and image, but where the waves, what you do is you take the waves from the whole into each region.
And so you can make an apple in 3 dimensions?
Yeah, well, not only that, but each part of the image contains an image of the whole, but with less detail than the whole.
So you feel that the condition of each human individual is to be this fuzzy part of the hologram that contains the whole?
Yes, but at the same time, he is a contributor to the whole.
And your basic idea is that the architecture of human society is now such that there is an interaction between all the 5 million people at one time.
5 billion.
5 billion, sorry. But there's no actual understanding of coherence.
Actually, they are a whole, but it's incoherent, right? You see, they cannot avoid being a whole. They're exchanging. Every person is according to what the others are. You see, if 2 people are enemies, each one makes the other, right? Is that clear? They
each make the other an enemy.
Well, what he is, you see, 2 enemies are very closely related. You see, people who hate each other are extremely closely related, except that they're in an incoherent relationship, right? One that's very destructive, but people, and hate is a very close relationship, but destructive. Now it has to be turned to something else, right?
In this transition from seeing the world as parts to the world as a whole, that you think we all need to survive, there are going to be many difficulties. How do you see that transition?
Well, I don't see exactly how it's going to happen. You see, I think that we are faced with these challenges, the danger of nuclear war, the danger of ecological destruction, or many other dangers, the fact that our cities are becoming difficult to live in. You see that the cars will eventually clog them up. Now, people are committed now to the view of growth, economic growth, but that is just what will destroy the planet, right? As if 5 billion people want to live at the present European, American standard of living, Japanese and so on, then they will be like a swarm of locusts descending on the planet. So somehow there has to be a change where we say the desire for material goods has to be more limited, which means people will have to find something else in life, right? If they want to survive, you see. So there won't even be material goods if we keep this up. And you see that you'll get, say, much more carbon dioxide, much more pollution, much more everything, you see. You see, that I don't think people have sunk in the magnitude of the change that's needed. You see, somebody has said that we spend $1 trillion a year throughout the world on armaments. That amount spent on the ecology would solve the problem. But if you spend a lot less than that, it probably won't. Otherwise, it will slow it down.
What's the most important thing, money or consciousness?
Consciousness. No, because whether money is spent will also depend on consciousness, you see, on whether we feel we're a part of this one world or whether we all think we're separate. People are more ready to listen to that now, but the crisis is developing at a very fast rate.
So in a sense what you're saying is that Bohr was seeing something, and nobody really understood him, maybe because he didn't dare to say it.
Well, I think they weren't ready to listen, you see. The people didn't want this one world. They were frightened of it. They said, we have so many enemies, we want to take care of ourselves first, and so on. You see, those attitudes still prevail, but there's a movement away, right? Enough for people to listen.
Now, if we take the tradition that you are out of natural scientists that have been involved in discussing society, that is traditionally a tradition where spirituality and worldviews and religion are seen as enemies. If you take the left-wing natural scientist tradition from before the Second World War, how come that scientists today are interested in worldviews and spirituality?
Well, some are. I don't think a great many yet. Partly because the science itself has opened up that possibility in the way that I've described, and partly because I think, just as with other people, there's a growing sense of the inadequacy of the old approach. You see, that it will not only not solve all the problems that I've said, but also it creates a kind of empty life. You see, if you could imagine that we are successful, that the economy grew and grew and grew, what would we have at the end? You see, people would be bored, you see. In the 60s, when there was prosperity, you had all these hippies. They found it had no meaning. If we had that kind of prosperity, the kind of prosperity that people hoped for, I think the whole thing would collapse faster than ever.
But how are we going to become hippies? Through prosperity or through poverty?
Well, prosperity would make hippies. Poverty might make people who are afraid to lose their jobs, you see. But I think neither of those ways is going to work. You see, that a change of consciousness is needed. And the worldview is part of that.
And what is the most important way that this change in consciousness will come about, you think?
Well, I came here in 1957 for 1 month in the summer, and then again in 58. Now, at that time, I was just moving from Israel to England, and we spent a month here at the Institute. And we talked about physics mostly at that time. There's still a strong commitment, even perhaps partly unconscious, to the old atomistic worldview.
So what you're saying is that science has shown us something that scientists do not want to see.
Well, they have become so used to the way of seeing it that they don't want to change it. You see, they feel uncomfortable about changing it, and they feel there's no reason to change it. Many of them, they say, well, we're doing so well now, why should we change it? In one sense, it looks as if we're doing very well, you see, but if you look at the broader view, it looks very dangerous.
Thank you.